Danny was the type of girl who was always up for an adventure. She had this fiery spirit about her that wanted to take on the world. We both met each other during our freshman year in high school. We had been assigned to a project together, and after only a few minutes of speaking, we quickly hit it off. At the time, I was unaware of just how amazing her life had been, despite her being so young. It always seemed like she had one amazing story to tell after the next. In middle school, her father took her on a month-long vacation through Europe. It seemed like every winter, her family would go out of state to go ski at a resort. Every summer had been filled with one interesting activity after the next. Rock climbing, camping, skydiving, vacations all across the US, you name it. As the months passed by, despite her amazing life, she always seemed to want to spend time with me. I would later come to find out that she had a massive crush on me, which still shocks me to this day. In school, I wasn't what you would call adventurous. I was the kid that always sat in the back and kept to themselves. I wasn't against speaking to others or making friends, mind you. I just didn't really go out of my way to do so. Although Danny always had something going on, she'd still find time to talk with me. Eventually, the months turned into years and our friendship grew and grew, until I finally worked up the courage to ask her to prom. When I did, her face lit up like I had never seen before. She agreed and we had an amazing time. Danny and I started dating shortly after that. After we graduated high school, Danny was getting ready to go to college. Meanwhile, my father had gotten me a job at the company he works at. The job was for an entry-level accountant. It wasn't an amazing job, but money was money. About halfway through her college term, Danny asked me if I wanted to move in together. I was stunned at the suggestion, but happily accepted. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. It was fairly close to her college and not too far away from where I worked, so it was perfect. We had lived here for nearly a year when it happened. Danny had told me about this upcoming camping trip her friends had planned months in advance. She had forgotten to mention it to me right up until the month it was to happen. She apologized profusely and invited me anyway, but with such short notice there was no way I would have been able to get time off. She felt bad and offered to give her friends a rain check, but I told her not to worry. I told her to go have fun, and that I'd be here when she got back. She made it up to me by taking me out to my favorite restaurant and spending a lot more time with me in the days leading up to the trip. Those days stand out the most in my mind, as they were the days with Danny before she came back. She had packed up her bag and gave me all the information I needed on where she was going and who she was going with. I told her it wasn't necessary, but she did anyway. She was only going to be gone for a week, and they were going into the mountains about a 2-hour drive away. She told me she'd try to text me, but being outdoors, the reception would probably be spotty at best. When her ride arrived, she gave me a kiss and a hug before she hopped in, giving me a faint wave as the car disappeared around the corner. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time, but I had this sinking feeling that I may never see her again. The days that followed seemed to bleed together as I worked pretty much non-stop. It wasn't until I glanced at the calendar one day that I noticed a week had already gone by. When I had gotten home from work, I eagerly entered the door, excited to see Danny, but she wasn't there. I thought perhaps they were running late, so I decided to wait up for her. Hours passed until I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, it was morning and Danny still wasn't home. Concerned, I sent her a few text messages asking her if she was on her way, but I received no reply. I headed off to work, figuring she probably ended up just staying an extra day. Another day passed, then another. By that point, I had been calling her phone regularly and attempting to contact any of the friends she had gone with. I was on the verge of calling the police and orchestrating a search and rescue for her when there was a knock on my door at around 8 p.m. I ran to the door as fast as I could and threw it open. Standing on the other side was Danny. I threw my arms around her and told her how much I missed her. She didn't respond. She just stood there, I took a few steps back and asked her what happened and if she was alright. She just shook her head, and under her breath she said that she was fine, just tired. I told her that I was starting to get worried about her, but she just repeated that she was fine. I asked her if she was hungry, but she just shook her head and walked past me. She set down her bag and immediately went to bed. Seeing Danny like this was certainly out of character. For as long as I've known her, she always had this bright smile on her face and always wanted to talk to me about things. Seeing her be so apathetic was concerning. I tried to chalk it up to her just being exhausted from the trip. I thought maybe she had gotten into a fight with one of her friends and it took a toll on her. That night after I had gone to bed, I was awoken to an odd noise. It sounded like growling coming from somewhere in my apartment. When I opened my eyes and looked around, I nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw her. Danny was standing over the bed, just staring at me. I asked her what she was doing, and for a moment it didn't seem like she could hear me. I asked again, and she told me she just went to get something to drink. She then walked around the edge of the bed with an almost rigid pace. She crawled back into bed and quickly fell asleep. That was the first instance that I noticed something was wrong. The next was much more disturbing. After I'd gotten home from work, I walked in through the door to find the apartment pitch black. Usually Danny would get home before I did, so the dark caught me off guard. I thought perhaps she was having a late night too, but when I flipped the light switch, I nearly fell to the floor. She had been sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. I asked her what she was doing, and after a couple of minutes she told me she was just waiting for me to get home. She turned to look at me, and during that split second, I didn't recognize the person behind her eyes. I can't explain it, but it just didn't seem like it was Danny to me. The nights that followed, she started getting into this habit of spending an awful lot of time in the bathroom. On the surface, it doesn't seem overly strange, but the noises I would hear coming from inside was nothing I had ever heard before. The faint sounds of something tearing, and what sounded like the crackling of knuckles would drift through the wooden door. Whenever I'd knock and ask if she was alright, she'd answer the door a few minutes later and tell me she just wasn't feeling well. I'd tried to sneak a peek into the bathroom behind her, but I couldn't see anything out of place. The next day, I decided to give some of her friends a call to see if something had happened to her on the trip. Most of them I contacted informed me that I should give Alice a call, as she was the one who shared a tent with Danny. I rang her up, and after explaining the situation to her, she went silent for a moment. She told me that during the trip, Danny had gotten lost in the woods. I asked her to elaborate as I wasn't sure what she meant. She said that the last day they were there, Danny went out on a short hike and didn't come back. They didn't know what to do. They searched everywhere and said they even stayed an extra day because of it. They were about to drive back and get the police when Danny finally showed up. Alice told me Danny had been acting strange ever since she came back. She said she would just stare off into the distance and only speak in one-word responses. She thought that it might have just been exhaustion that caused the sudden change in demeanor. She thought it best to just bring her home as soon as possible. I thanked her for letting me know and I hung up. I just got home from work a few hours ago and I'm not really sure what to do myself. I've decided to type this out to ask for any help in the matter. I'm really starting to fear something might have happened to Danny in those woods, but I'm not sure what. I've been looking up psychiatrists in the area, or any specialists that may be able to help me, because for the last 3.5 hours, Danny has just been sitting in front of one of our mirrors, staring at her reflection, without blinking. If any of you have ever seen something like this before, please let me know. I'm going to try to take her to the doctors tomorrow to get her checked out. But until then, I don't plan on letting her out of my sight. I just hope I can stay awake. throughout the night.